Senator Ludlam.
Tonight I rise to speak on the multiple fronts on which our environment is under assault, and I want to acknowledge those people, particularly those West Australians who at some time in their lives took stock of what was happening around you and did not look away. Those people who took up work in defence of life on Earth in Western Australia and across this ancient continent, and to this day form the backbone of the environment movement, which has done so much to protect and preserve the environment which sustains our communities and our economy. Those in the goldfields and their allies across the country who continue to hold the line 40 years after uranium mining was first seriously proposed for Western Australia. This was the campaign that got me started and ultimately propelled me into this chamber, where I am proud tonight to be able to represent those who do so much in defence of our community and environment. Uncle Glenn Cook, my friend, colleague and mentor Cato Muir, Vicky McCabe, Jeffrey Stokes and Richard Evans, and their supporters from down south and those who walk in the footprints of those who have walked this ancient country for millennia, Mia Pepper, Marcus, K.A., Bilbo. All of these people, many of whom are probably unknown in this chamber, and yet whom have played such a powerful role over such a long period of time in keeping the outback of Western Australia free of this most toxic of industries. As I speak tonight, there are those who are camped at Challar Forest on the south coast of Western Australia, not too far from Walpole. Western Australia has forests that are globally significant. The southwest of WA is a global biodiversity hotspot, and WA has a strong and very proud tradition of standing up in defence of old growth and high conservation value forests. We know that forests help regulate climate, they moderate weather, and a recent report showed a strong link between declining rainfall and unregulated deforestation in Western Australia. Half of the forests of the West Australia's southwest have been permanently removed, and of the remaining half, only about 15% is in pre-European condition. And yet the West Australian government will shortly table plans to double the area of native forest logging in the southwest. So to those like Jess Beckerling, who has been engaged ever since I've met her in protection of native forest ecosystems in the southwest, Ellie Smith and Dylan Lehman, who were involved in recent non-violent direct actions in defence of these priceless ecosystems in the southwest, I'm proud to be able to represent your work here in the Senate. Across the Kimberley and the Midwest, and we're a couple of years behind the extraordinary confrontations that have occurred in New South Wales and Queensland, we are seeing the ongoing threat of hydraulic fracking of our precious water resources, the driest inhabited continent on Earth, and yet we are letting the gas industry overrun our farming and pastoral areas and our wilderness areas, injecting sand, chemicals, occasionally diesel and goodness knows what else, into aquifers, into these precious water bodies, in order to squeeze the last finite drops of fossil fuels out of the ground. Almost the entire Kimberley, including the water supply of Broome, is under threat, under exploration. Lock the Gate, which have a really proud history on the east coast, are now established in Geraldton. Mount Lesueur is a flashpoint at the moment, an incredible area, an area rich in biodiversity that is now under threat from gas fracking. To Lisa Smith and to the other members of Frack Free Geraldton, to the farmers who are calling for the gate to be locked, who are calling for a veto, for Dale Park, who's the head of WA Farmers Federation, who said what we are calling for is a right of veto on exploration for gas and petroleum, like we have with mining, because that actually makes the negotiations a lot more equal, he says, when dealing with drillers and gas companies. We know that the people of the West Kimberley are accomplished in sticking up for themselves when those from down south come calling with vast and inappropriate industrial development proposals, whether it be dam across the Fitzroy River, whether it be GM cotton plantations, More recently, whether it be the defence of the Kimberley coast against a completely inappropriate onshore gas plant. And now, most recently, this community, which has won so much at such extraordinary cost, is facing unregulated gas fracking across the area as well. Those who have welcomed me to the camps on the Kimberley coast, as I've traipsed through there with my colleagues Robin Chappell and Rachel Seawitt from time to time, brought Bob Brown and Christine Milne through that part of the country, those who camp there still in defence of dreaming trails that have been sung for tens of thousands of years for the intact cultural heritage of that part of the world. And of course we know that the destruction of the precious environment of Western Australia does not just occur in wilderness areas or those far-flung parts of our state, but happens very, very close to home. For those of us who live in the Perth metropolitan area, we are still seeing vast areas of precious and irreplaceable urban bushland going under bulldozers. Dawn Jex and James Mummy from the Hands Off Point Perrin group and those others across the southern suburbs who have, in some instances, put their lives on hold to save the area around Point Perrin, or those who have stood up for the Belia wetlands over more years than I can remember for a totally inappropriate and appallingly expensive freeway project that refuses to just lie down and die, and now Premier Barnett is at it again. So my colleague Lynn McLaren MLC, who has provided important support for that campaign over a very long period of time. What these things all have in common is that they are linked to a global phenomenon. The destruction that our model of unlimited industrial growth is visiting on ecosystems across this continent is not just an Australian phenomenon. It is linked with what scientists are calling the Holocene extinction, the sixth great extinction event. All of these phenomena are linked, and so the movements across the state of West Australia, across this continent of Australia and across the world are themselves linked in this great work of protection. And in here, as a representative of the Greens, I'm proud to advocate for strong national environmental laws, because what is new Prime Minister Tony Abbott doing in response to this cascading extinction event, which is flowing across the landscape, terrestrial ecosystems, marine, riverine, wherever you go, the fingerprints are there. Well, what this Prime Minister is proposing to do is absolve himself of responsibility. That 30 or 40-year arc of accumulation of national environmental law to deal with issues of national environmental significance are simply to be washed back to the states and territories. And as a Western Australian, I can say with great confidence that I have no reason to believe that the Barnett government and the framework of state environmental law and the deliberate enfeeblement of the EPA, which has failed on so many counts to hold industry and government up to the standards that the community expects. The idea that you would hand national environmental powers of things up to and including protection of native species and biodiversity, and even industries as toxic as the uranium industry, that you would hand back to somebody like Premier Barnett and an Environmental Protection Authority that has had to conflict itself out of decisions as weighty as those on James Price Point and find itself in the courts as a result. I'm proud to stand with those who care for the environment and who back their care up with action. Those on the other side don't appear to care about the destruction of the very things that sustain us, but it is what drives the Greens. It's what propels us to turn up in here day after day. So we stand with those who are putting themselves in the way of business as usual, in the way of this extinction event that is rolling across the landscape, where governments act as proxies for large corporate interests, stealing from current and future generations and totalling it up and calling it GDP. As my dear friend Dave Sweeney, nuclear campaigner for the ACF, have said, community power is baseload power. It's always on, it's always there, and I'm proud to represent it in this place.